everybody, I am back, and today we're going to talk about foil wings that we're using for windsurf wave foiling. Now real quick, if you haven't seen me before, I'll give you a little bit of background. My wife Lisa and I have been windsurfing for 13 years, and the last 3 of those years we also started windsurf wave foiling. And as many of you know, it's been a fantastic addition to our activities. So today I want to talk to you about the wings that we're using for windsurf wave foiling. There's 4 wings that I'm going to show you. They're very, very different. They have very specific purposes, perform extremely differently from one another, and I think you're really going to enjoy it and hopefully learn something as well. So let's get right over to the foil wings and let's take a look at them. So the wings we're going to look at today are GoFoil wings. That's the brand that Lisa and I have been using, and they've been working out fantastic for windsurf wave foiling. I've arranged them so that from top to bottom, we're going from high surface area to lower surface area. So the M200 is about 1900 square centimeters on surface area, and down here to the RS 1300, that's about 1300 square centimeters in surface area. And then from left to right, I've arranged them from low aspect wings to high aspect wings. Now let's talk about aspect ratio for a minute, just so that we're all on the same page. Aspect ratio is basically the ratio of the wingspan squared divided by the area of the wing. That's how it's calculated for wings that taper, such as these. All these taper. There's a simpler formula for wings that are rectangular, but for wings that taper, the wingspan squared divided by the surface area of the wing is the way that aspect ratio is calculated. So what does that mean? That basically means that you've either got a short, fat wing or a long, narrow wing. The RS 1300 is much higher aspect ratio than the Maliko 200. You'll notice the Maliko 200 has a much wider chord, and so that way it looks shorter and fatter, where the RS 1300 has a very narrow chord and quite a long wingspan. So that's what we call aspect ratio. Now the industry of wind foiling has kind of taken it upon themselves to compare wings mostly by surface area. When you look on the websites and you look at the spec sheets, they're characterizing them mostly by their surface area. But that is not the only thing that really characterizes a foil. We also have to consider the thickness of the foil, the profile shape, the stiffness, the curvature. You know, does the bottom have concave or convex features? So all these things go into making a foil wing what it is. It's not just about surface area. Surface area is kind of a convenient way to quickly compare wings, but it's not a thorough way at all. It's kind of like comparing windsurfing fins based solely on the length. There's so many other aspects to windsurfing fins besides length. There's rake, there's twist, there's flex, there's chord, there's thickness. All of these things go into making a foil as well as a windsurfing fin, which is basically a foil. So let's talk about these a little bit. You'll notice that the M200 has the largest surface area out of these 4 wings, and that means it's going to give you a lot of lift. You get quite a bit more lift out of the M200 than you would out of the Iwa, simply because of the surface area. Now the M200 and the Iwa are shaped fairly similarly, have similar foil thickness when you look at the wing head on. They're similar curvature, and they ride fairly similarly except for the lift. The M200 gets much more lift. When the wind gets above 20 miles an hour, I cannot use the M200 because I just start to overfoil again and again and again. So when the wind is under 20 miles an hour, I'll use the M200. When the wind is over 20 miles an hour, I will use the Iwa. Comparing the M200 and Iwa to the RS 1300, very, very different wings. They perform totally different. So the high aspect ratio of this RS 1300 allows it to have incredible glide. It's like nothing I've ever felt. I get on the RS 200 and I can coast forever. It pumps insanely well, but it turns like crap. So let me explain that, because when you get on the RS1300, it's going to feel really sensitive side to side. So what do I mean when I say that it turns like crap? How can it be sensitive side to side but not turn very well? Well, the M200 and the Iwa have incredible grip. When you're on a steep, fast wave and you want to cut hard back and forth and thrash and slay the wave, you can push the M200 and the Iwa pretty much as hard as you want, and they will not give. They will grip, they will hold, they turn really well, and they carve. They really, really carve. When we compare that to the RS1300, it's super sensitive side to side, and it has really lousy grip. If you push it hard through a turn, it will slip, it will yaw, it will slide, it will drop. You just cannot push this high aspect wing like you can the M200 or the Iwa. So they have completely different uses. If I wanted to do a leisurely, casual downwinder, I would love to use this RS1300. You jump on a wave, you just glide forever. But if I want to thrash and slay the wave and carve it up, the M200 or the Iwa is going to be the absolute way that I'm going to go. Two totally different wings with totally different purposes. The RS1300, it pumps really, really well. And we're going to talk about tails in a minute and how I pair it up with the tail depending on how I want to pump. But that's one of the major advantages of the RS1300. It's got incredible glide. It pumps really, really well. One other advantage of this RS1300, it does not overfoil hardly at all. The M200 and the Iwa, if you're not paying attention really, really well and you get near the surface, it will overfoil. You will drop like a rock and crash onto the water surface. Where I've had this RS1300 right up to the surface of the water, skidding across the surface of the water, and it still doesn't drop. Even if you overfoil, it doesn't drop. So it's a really, really forgiving wing when it comes to overfoiling. And I think what gives the M200 and the Iwa such great grip and such great hold is the curve. If you hold these wings up, they've got a lot more curve underneath, kind of like a rainbow underneath, where the RS1300 is very flat. It has very, very little curve. And the curve gives these wings much better grip than the 200 and the Iwa. Now the EZ1600, you'll see the way I have it positioned on this spectrum, it's lower surface area than the M200, greater surface area than the Iwa, but I've got it positioned a little bit to the right on this spectrum because it's slightly higher aspect ratio. The M200 and Iwa are kind of in a number 4 range on aspect ratio, where the 1600 is more of a 5 and the RS1300 is more of a 7. So the EZ1600 is also very thin, which gives it a little bit less lift. It's flatter, which means it doesn't overfoil as much as the Maliko 200 or the Iwa, but it has very, very little curve. It's really, really flat. So it runs into a similar problem as the RS1300. If you push it hard through turns, it wants to slip, yaw, and slide. Again, the M200 and the Iwa grip and hold, and you can carve and slay the wave through your cutbacks. The EZ and the RS, they slip, yaw, and slide. Just not quite as much fun when you want to really carve it up and slay. But I will say the EZ1600 does have a little bit better glide than the M200 and the Iwa. It also pumps better than the M200 and the Iwa. So you're starting to see the trade-offs, you're starting to see the advantages and the disadvantages. They are not the same wings at all. They are very, very different animals. Because they're different animals, they require a little bit different riding style when you're riding these wings. So, for example, the RS1300 and even the EZ1600, because they're so sensitive side to side and because they do not grip and hold when you push them through a turn, you need to keep your feet closer to the center line of the board on the RS and the EZ. You don't need to put your foot across the board as much, because if you do, number one, the wing will slip, yaw, and slide, as I mentioned before. And number two, you just don't need to put your foot very far across the board because these two wings require very, very little pressure in order to initiate a turn. The M200 and the Iwa, on the other hand, require more pressure to get it going into a turn. But you can maintain that pressure and you can push hard. So you can put your feet closer to the rails of the board, whereas the EZ and the RS closer to the center line of the board. Now, technically speaking, the RS should be a much faster wing than the M200, but honestly, I have not noticed that riding it. I've been side by side with friends of mine who I know very well. I know their riding styles. I know their capabilities, their skill level, and they'll be on the M200 and I'll be on the RS 1300, and I'll be pushing to try and pass them, and it might be slightly faster, but I have not noticed that the RS 1300 is a hell of a lot faster than the M200. It is slightly faster, but for what I'm doing, it really does not prove to be extremely faster than the M200. So now you'll see that I put the tails that I use in the illustration here so that we can talk about the tails and how I pair them with the wings. So the wing itself on these tails is the same. It's a 17.5-inch Gulfoil flip tips. The difference between the two is that the one on the bottom has a shorter pedestal than the one on the top. And that basically extends your fuselage. So if you use the wing on the top with the longer pedestal, that's like using a longer fuselage. They've just designed it and made it easy so that you can switch it in and out with the pedestal. You can actually take the wing off and attach it to the pedestal, so you don't have to have two wings like I do. You could just have one blue wing and just unscrew it and screw it onto the pedestal length that you want to use for that particular session. I have two just because it makes it a little bit easier. I don't have to unscrew it each time. So what do I do with these tails? Well, let's say, for example, I want to pair one of these tails up with the RS 1300. It's going to perform a little bit differently depending on which length pedestal that I use. So if I use the longer pedestal, it's going to slow everything down a little bit. The RS 1300 is going to turn just a little bit slower. It's going to respond just a little bit slower. So when I'm beginning on a new wing, I might want to use the longer pedestal when I'm testing a new wing, just so that it's a little bit more forgiving. As I improve with a new wing and get used to it, then I might want to switch to the shorter pedestal so I can get a little bit snappier turn. But I find the RS 1300, it's really not snappy to begin with. I don't really find that the purpose of it is to be snappy, so I actually really like to pair it with the longer pedestal. Now that also changes the pumping style a little bit. The RS 1300 pumps incredibly well. You get your legs going and you drive it down and then allow it to float and then allow it to climb and then load it again at the top. So you've got drive, float, climb, and load, and you repeat this over and over. That process gets slowed down with the longer pedestal. The shorter pedestal allows you to perform your pumping repetitions more quickly. So you can choose which one you want, but my suggestion is if you're learning to pump, use the longer pedestal because it slows the whole process down. And because it's longer, you get a little bit more power out of each pump. So you're not really pumping less, but you're pumping slower. So start out with a longer pedestal if you want to learn to pump and you want to slow everything down. And once you get better, if you want things to turn a little bit more quickly, you could try the shorter. But I really like the shorter with the Iwa and with the M200. That's where the shorter pedestal really makes things fun, because these two wings, as we discussed earlier, can really carve, slay, and tear up the wave during your cutbacks. So when you pair it with this short pedestal on the tail, man, it increases your ability to cut, carve, and slay even more. The longer pedestal is still fun. It does slow everything down a little bit, but it's not as snappy on your turns, not as snappy on your carves. So that's the main difference between these two tails. The same tail wings, but different lengths in the pedestals. The other important feature with these flip tip wings is it allows you to change the stab angle. If you look closely, there's a green shim that's inserted between the pedestal and the blue wing. And that allows you to change the angle that this rear wing is going to ride at. Well, why is that important? Well, this is important because windsurf wave foiling is very different than wing foiling. And the reason it's very different is with wing foiling and even kite foiling, you're getting quite a bit of lift from the wing itself or from the kite. But with windsurf wave foiling, you're getting downward pressure from your sail, which is out near the nose of the board. And so that downward pressure needs to be compensated for. And it's compensated for by using a shim in your rear wing so that the angle of the wing allows you to generate some lift from this rear wing. If you don't have any shim in your rear wing, what ends up happening is your front wing starts to drop. And it makes it a very frustrating session, which is easily rectified by simply having a wing that allows you to insert a shim into it. Not all wings allow this. For example, some of the newer GoFoil wings are fixed. They don't have screws. They are not giving you the option of putting in a shim. And those are wonderful for winging, but they don't work very well for windsurf wave foiling. So make sure that you have a wing that allows you to put some shim in it, and that will help you to generate the proper lift to compensate for the weight of the sail that's out near the nose of your board. So that's about all I've got for you right now. I hope that this has helped. I hope that it's built your understanding of wings that are designed for windsurf wave foiling and help you to figure out which wing is going to do what you want on a particular day. You may want one wing one day just because you're feeling a certain way, and you may want a totally different wing the next day because you're feeling a different way on that day. Or it might be because of the conditions. You might be in conditions where you're on steep, fast waves and you still want to be able to turn, but you don't want to overfoil, and the EZ 1600 might be good. But if you're on slower waves, the M200 is incredible because you can still carve, cut, and slay, but you can do that slowly and you can push it hard. If you want to cruise and find some nice swells just to ride and relax, the RS 1300, there's nothing better than that. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please click the subscribe button down below. Also click the notification button so you get notifications when more videos come out. It's been great chatting today. I hope you learned a little bit about foil wings for windsurf wave foiling, and I'll see you next time. Hope to see you on the water.